It's in keeping with the thing that I developed here, a musical composition by Alex Arango. Um, he's a composer that received a $5,000 Lee Weimer's Emerging Artist Grant by our club, and so he composes. It's called In La Plaza, and the musical genre is called El Paseo, and that arose back in the time of the Viceroyalty of Nueva Granada, which fell under the great liberator General Simon Bolivar, who fought for its independence from Spain. Nueva Granada became known as La Gran Colombia, which later broke into the modern countries of Colombia, Panama, Venezuela, and Ecuador. Especial music originated in Colombia and is extremely popular in those countries, has spread out to other areas, considered the national musical style of Ecuador. As the music evolved from classically European waltz dance by lending itself to accompaniment by guitar, mandolin, string, and other instruments. Anyway, so Alex Arango did that, and we just gave you a 30-second view of it. So welcome, everyone. Uh, this is meeting number 5,275. There's no November birthdays, but today is Veterans Day, when we honor our military by having General McMaster as our speaker. And we have an anniversary. Leslie Hamilton joined us last year. Today is her anniversary. She became our executive director. Thanks for saving our bacon, Leslie. The club is in good hands with you. And now I have to introduce our city council member, Magdalena Carrasco. She represents District 5. Her term began January 6th of 2015 and ends in 2023. Mayor Liccardo appointed her vice mayor from 2017 to 2019. She's the first council member from East San Jose in over 30 years. Like me, she's a child of immigrant parents, and like Sal Pizarro, she went to UC Santa Barbara, working her way through college. Magdalena, are you ready? Are you there?
I'm ready. Yes. Hi, how are you?
Did it? Yeah. Hi. Welcome.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Fernando, for the invitation. And I want to thank all the Rotarians that are here today. This is a nice large crowd, given that you're meeting now through Zoom, but you've always been very active. And so I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And I know that I'm on very limited time because I hear that you run a very efficient, on time agenda. So let's get to it. But before I do start, I want to thank all our veterans who have so courageously served our country, ensuring that we have a democracy that we can stand by and that we can be very proud of. So to all of our veterans who have served, I want to thank them and truly express my appreciation. I know that there's no other country where I would prefer to raise my 4 children. I have 3 still that are home, but wanted to make sure that we recognized our very brave men and women and their families for all the sacrifices that they make. So I've been before you once before. This was very early on when I first was elected. Maybe I wasn't even sworn in yet at the time because I won my first election during the primary. But much has changed since the last time that I was here over 6 years ago. As Fernando has put up a map there, I represent District 5, which is the east side of San Jose. And I have the pleasure of representing a district that is incredibly diverse. It's incredibly rich in history. And of course, as I just talk a little bit about the history of the east side of San Jose, we'll see how incredibly resilient our residents are. You know, they come from all walks of life and from all corners of earth to make a living and to improve the conditions of their lives, and that for their family and especially for their children. I'm always amazed at how our families tend to pick themselves up even when they get repeatedly knocked down. And of course, the administration that still sits in the White House has done so even before he got in there during his campaign. You know, we were called names, we've been attacked, we've been threatened with deportation, with separating our families. And I have to tell you that when I've gone into classrooms to talk to young folks about their future, it is heartbreaking that those messages have been so loud and clear that one of the things that young middle schoolers and ninth graders have expressed to me is the real fear that they have about coming out into the parking lot to wait for their parents and never having their parents show up. And so you can only imagine the kind of trauma that is when you live under that kind of whether it's perceived or real microscope in your community. It's a collective trauma as well as a very personal trauma. But I want to tell you, we are also home to the oldest recognized regional park in California, which is Alum Rock. So you haven't taken a little hike out there, it's well worth the opportunity to get out there. We're getting ready to celebrate its 150th anniversary in the next year or so. And so we'll keep you posted because we have a lot of exciting things lined up. But it's truly a beautiful park. And I'm always surprised when I hear that folks haven't been out there. I grew up there with family reunions and big Easter egg hunts, and our baptisms were celebrated at the barbecue pits there at Alum Rock Park. But we also are home to the beautiful working farm, which is the Emma Prush Farm. It's just a beautiful farm out there, a wonderful Sunday afternoon stroll that you can take, but also it's home to the one and only nonprofit organization, Vegilution, which has done an incredible job in terms of teaching us how to get back to organic farming, have access to good quality foods, and they've really stepped it up, especially since COVID has hit our families as hard as it has. And of course, our hidden gem, if you haven't been out to the Mexican Heritage Plaza, this is a plaza that we're very proud of. Of course, we have founding fathers here that were really part of making sure that this happened on hallowed ground. This was the site of one of the Safeways, the first Safeway actually, where Cesar Chavez began to organize that very famous grape boycott that I even participated on when I was in college. But Safeway's not there anymore. And what is very befitting is that now we have a plaza that we're very proud of. I want to thank Fernando for all of his work on making sure that happened. But of course, I would be remiss not to mention our former council member and supervisor, Blanca Alvarado, Picarrillo, many folks who really were part of making this vision into a reality, and now we get the benefit of it. But it's a misnomer to just say it's the Mexican Heritage Plaza. We have performances, and we have activities, and we have a school of arts that take place there that are very diverse, and it's not just Mexican oriented. We have even individuals coming all the way from over the hill from Santa Cruz who book it for several weeks at a time to do their performances. So it's really a beautiful place to come and feel the community, and there's just a really beautiful spirit about it. But the Mexican Heritage Plaza, again, is a very different place today than it was even just 12 months ago. It's now serving as a testing site for our community, free testing site for anyone who's interested in getting a COVID test. And as the numbers are surging, I recommend that everybody continue to get tested. But also it provides food distribution and of course, a lot of the community placemaking that is so important to us, so that we don't feel so isolated during a very isolating time in our history. So a couple of things that we've been working on. So let me just tell you that before COVID-19 hit, my team was extremely active, very busy, working on engaging the community, making sure that we were civically engaged and that we were addressing the issues that were most impacting our community, such as housing, public safety, blight, beautification, really quality of life issues that were really important to the community and that had been stressed while I was trying to get into office and once I won my seat. Now that COVID-19 has hit, of course, we know that has changed everything, and
30 seconds.
and our lives are very different. So I just want to say the following. Fernando, you cheated me of a couple of minutes. I want to say the following. COVID-19 has really changed and transformed the lives of many, but especially east of 101. For some, COVID-19 is a huge inconvenience. We have to make sacrifices to make sure that our families don't get sick, our elderly don't get sick. But I have 3 of the 5 zip codes that have the highest number of COVID cases and the highest number of deaths. So our communities have been ravished by COVID-19, including the shutdown of many businesses and the loss of income. So my team has had to shift into very basic needs, which is shelter, clothing, food. And by the way, our kids were the ones that were mostly impacted when the digital divide suddenly came to light and our kids were displaced from their educational attainment. So those are the issues that we're dealing with. We've been able to invest quite a bit of money into making sure that our children are reconnected with their education. We've made sure to invest funding into childcare because families still have to get back to work. We are the center, the epicenter of the essential worker. And so again, I want to thank you for this opportunity. And if there's anything that I can do for you, even hooking you up to a free test to make sure that you're safe and that your family's safe, please do not hesitate to call my office. We're more than happy to facilitate that. I want everyone to be safe and we want to control this pandemic. We know that it's surging, so let's not let our guard down. Thank you so much, Fernando.
Thank you, Magdalena. Thank you. Next, we have a new member introduction. Besides the Mezcal restaurant, he runs El Cafecito, the new eatery at the San Jose Museum of Art. Adolfo Gomez, tell us about yourself.
Good morning, everyone. I just want to start saying thank you for allowing me to be here today. Everybody can hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So I just want to say it's Veterans Day. I want to start saying thank you and honoring all who serve our nation. We currently employ 3 veterans, so I'm really proud of having those people working with us. My name is Adolfo Gomez. I'm an immigrant. I came to the United States in '89 when I was about 18 years old. So I've basically been here almost over 3 years. So I consider San Jose to be my city, and I'm very proud of living here. I live 5 minutes from downtown. I've been in the food and beverage industry since I was 18. Been working in different places, working hotels, working private clubs and all that. So before I opened Mezcal, we opened Mezcal in 2008. And before that, I took over the Silicon Valley Capital Club in '97. So I was there for almost 12 years. I was operations for the Silicon Valley Capital Club. Then that's really where I met a lot of people who are Rotarians now. They were Rotarians then. My sponsor is Mr. Bundy, Tom Bundy. He basically forced me to be part of you guys. He works across from me, so he was coming every 3 days. Come on, let's go do it. Come on, let's go and do it. And I did that. I know Fernando Sansueta, we've been working together in some community events. I know, Fernando, you're very active. So thank you.
Welcome, and we hope to see you when we start meeting in person. Thank you very much.
I would love to do that. Thank you.
And now we're going to hear about our foundation's annual charitable donation request. Next. Hello? Well, you're going to get a letter from the foundation. I don't know what happened to our speaker, but you're going to get a letter asking you to please remember to donate to the foundation, which funds all of the committee work that we do. I don't know if the speaker is available, but if not, then I'm just going to say to you, look for that letter. Look for an annual charitable donation request, and it's from Clarence Stone. And we appreciate how generously our members have been, and that we're looking to see that we increase the amount that we can generate. You can see on the screen that we've got something like, I think it's 24% or 25% of our goal that the foundation has set. And we're going to look to you to remember how lucky we are that we don't have this virus, but there are many people that do. You heard Magdalena Carrasco mention that she's got 3 of the zip codes with the highest incidence of coronaviruses. And if you look at the newspaper, it shows that the Latino population is the most affected by this because of they're out there exposed to this virus. So please be generous. Next, we've got Arthur Weisbrot, retired judge of the U.S. Bankruptcy Court, member of the program committee, who will introduce our speaker. Judge Weisbrot.
Hello, Fernando. 1 second, I'm going to make myself.
We lost you.
I'm here.
Okay.
We're a couple minutes early, so that's why I had to stop. Can you see me and can you hear me?
Can hear you, but can't see you.
It's 12:29. We thought that was a date, a time for you. Go ahead.
Okay. You can't see me?
No.
We can.
I
Hi,
can.
Art.
Yeah, you're there. All right. Well, we can hear you.
It is my great honor to welcome Lieutenant Governor H.R. McMaster, a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution and lecturer at Stanford University. General McMaster is one of the most celebrated military leaders in modern history. It's absolutely perfect that he's speaking to us today on Veterans Day. General McMaster grew up in Philadelphia
Are you listening?
and graduated from the United States Military Academy. He served as an Army officer for 34 years and remained on active duty while serving as assistant to President Trump for national security affairs. He taught history at West Point and holds a PhD in history from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He wrote the best-selling book, Dereliction of Duty, in which he faulted President L.B. Johnson and the leaders in Washington, D.C. for our loss in the Vietnam War. In that book, he criticized the government for its, quote, arrogance, weakness, lying in pursuit of self-interest, and abdication of responsibility to the American people, unquote. His newest book, Battlegrounds, The Fight to Defend the Free World, also does not pull any punches. McMaster makes the case that American foreign policy has been misconceived, inconsistent, and poorly implemented. In Battlegrounds, he provides a clear pathway to improve strategic competence and to prevail in complex communications against our adversaries. It's a powerful call for Americans and citizens of the free world to transcend the vitriol of partisan political discourse, better educate themselves about the most significant challenges to national and international security, and to work together to secure peace and prosperity for future generations. You can buy a signed copy of the book. We've made a special arrangement, and there'll be a link which will allow you to do that. If you have questions, put them in the chat. And with that, I welcome, with great pride, General McMaster.
Arthur, thank you so much, and thanks to all of you for the privilege of being with you. I really look forward to the discussion, so I'll keep opening remarks brief and would like to hear what's on your minds. I wrote this book because I do believe that we have to come together as a country and understand better the challenges that we face, challenges that are crucial to our future and to future generations. And in Battlegrounds, I make the argument that we have diminished and drained our strategic competence, especially since the end of the Cold War. And the interpretation in the book is essentially that we were flushed with victory after the collapse of the Soviet Union and victory in the Cold War, and then what soon followed was a lopsided military victory over Saddam Hussein's army, the fourth largest army in the world during Operation Desert Storm. And there was reason to be confident in the 1990s, but that overconfidence led to complacency and led to a number of flawed assumptions about the post-Cold War world that's I think were a setup for disappointments in the 2000s. And these assumptions were mainly that an arc of history had guaranteed the primacy of our free and open societies over closed authoritarian systems, that great power competition was a relic of the past, and that our technological military prowess would guarantee our security. And if any foe had the temerity to challenge the United States, that war would be waged quickly, cheaply, and efficiently. And of course, this was a setup for shocks and disappointments in the 2000s, especially the mass murder attacks of September 11th, 2001, the most devastating terrorist attacks in history, in which Al-Qaeda used box cutters and airplanes to bypass our tremendous military capabilities and inflict losses of almost 3,000 innocents, and then the unanticipated length and difficulty of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. We often debate, should we have invaded Iraq? I think it would also be worthwhile debating who the heck thought it would be easy, and why did they think it would be easy? And then, of course, the financial crisis in 2008. And these events shook our confidence in our ability to implement a reasoned and sustainable foreign policy. And as a result, what I think what gained a lot of adherence in the 2000s was this idea that our disengagement from these complex challenges overseas would be an unmitigated good. I think that's the assumption that drove much of the Obama administration's foreign policy and much of the Trump administration's foreign policy. And we can see it, I think, in what is an abhorrent approach to Afghanistan these days, prioritizing our withdrawal to the extent that we actually partnered with the Taliban against the elected government of Afghanistan and resurrected some fundamentally flawed assumptions about our enemies. And one of the themes in the book is this idea of strategic narcissism, that the over-optimism of the 1990s and the pessimism and resignation of the 2000s had in common with strategic narcissism. And this is our tendency to define the world only in relation to us, and to assume that what we choose to do or choose not to do is decisive to accomplishing a favorable outcome. Strategic narcissism is what led, I believe, the George W. Bush administration to undervalue the risks and costs of action in connection with the invasion back in 2003. I think it is also the reason why the Obama administration undervalued the risks and costs of inaction in connection with the complete withdrawal from Iraq in December 2011, and how that set conditions for the rise of ISIS, or the unenforced red line in Syria, for example, or taking bombs not boots approach to Libya and doing very little to shape the political outcome in the wake of Gaddafi's demise in that conflict in 2013. So I argue in the book, instead of strategic narcissism, we should emphasize strategic empathy. And strategic empathy is a term I borrowed from a great historian named Zachary Shore, who teaches at Berkeley and wrote a great book called A Sense of the Enemy, another great book called Blunder, Why Smart People Make Dumb Decisions. And he argues that we underappreciate the degree to which emotions and ideology and aspirations drive and constrain the other, and that we should pay more attention to what is motivating the other, particularly rivals and adversaries and enemies, and to recognize that others have a say over the future course of events. And so I use this framework of strategic empathy to examine what I think are the most crucial challenges to our security, our prosperity, and our influence in the world. And I argue, for example, that strategic empathy requires us also to understand how the recent past produced the present as the first step in anticipating the future. I quote the historian Carl Becker and his observation that memory of past and anticipation of future should walk hand in hand in a happy way. And I think whenever we emphasize change and don't really pay enough attention to continuity and how the past produced the present, that also sets us up for typically making assumptions about these challenges that turn out to be flawed, and assumptions that are often implicit and therefore go unchallenged. So the assumption that I highlight in connection with the competition with the Chinese Communist Party is this assumption that China, having been welcomed into the international order, would play by the rules, and as China prospered, would liberalize its economy and liberalize its form of government. Of course, the opposite is what's happening, as the Chinese Communist Party, Xi Jinping in particular, is driven by fear and aspiration, fear of losing control. And this is what is driving the party's effort to extend and tighten its exclusive grip on power. This is why there is a campaign of cultural genocide going on in Xinjiang, where Uyghur birth rates are down 60% and 1.5 million people are in concentration camps. This is why there has been the passing of the national security law and the extension of the party's repressive arm into Hong Kong. You may have just seen the legislators who resigned yesterday, as the party is extending and tightening its grip on power there. This is why China is weaponizing people's social networks against them in the credit score to make sure that no one has the temerity to criticize Xi Jinping. And this is, of course, that the information, the Great Firewall is being built ever higher and higher in an effort to feed a steady stream of propaganda to the Chinese people. And it's fear, and it's also this aspiration that for China to take center stage in the world after what it portrays as the century of humiliation, and what this entails is an effort to create servile relationships across the Indo-Pacific region, to do so by setting debt traps for countries and creating really leveraging the coercive power that the party has over others. And it's also reflected in the party's actions in connection with trying to gain control of key logistics infrastructure and also the communications infrastructure associated with fifth generation communications in particular. And Chinese ambitions are vast, and they have a plan, and they're implementing a plan with an approach described in the book of co-option, coercion, and concealment. So we could talk more about that. This is, I think, the crucial competition of our century. If China succeeds, less free, less prosperous, and less safe. And then the other parts of the book deal with Russia and the assumption, based on strategic narcissism across 3 administrations now, that Vladimir Putin, if we just took a conciliatory approach with him, he would be kind of maybe like the Grinch on Christmas Eve. His heart will grow 2 sizes bigger. He will stop his disruptive activities and realize that his future really does lie with Whoville or the West in our case. And that's not going to happen again because of what drives and constrains Vladimir Putin. And this is the sense of honor lost after the collapse of the Soviet Union and Putin's drive to restore Russia to national greatness, and to do so in recognition that he can't compete with us head to head. Russia's economy is the size of Texas's economy or Italy's economy. And so Russia's theory of victory is to drag us all down, right? To reduce our confidence in who we are as a people, to polarize us further, to pit us against each other, and reduce our confidence in our democratic principles and institutions and processes. I'll just highlight what the other parts of the book cover. They cover the hostile states of Iran and North Korea, as well as the problem set associated with jihadist terrorism, centered with 2 chapters centered on South Asia, 2 chapters centered on the greater Middle East, extending across to North Africa and the Sahel region. And then a final chapter looks at new arenas of competition, and in particular at the interconnected problems of energy security, the environment, climate change, food and water security. And so the argument in the book is to restore our strategic competence through strategic empathy, but also through framing these complex problems, crafting assumptions that are based on a better understanding of the competitive environments that we're in, and then to take measures that defend us against these threats to our security and prosperity, but also to be introspective as well, to strengthen our democracy, to strengthen rule of law, to strengthen our confidence in authoritative sources of information, so we're less vulnerable to the disruptive actions of our adversaries, Russia in particular. And then also to make a concerted effort to restore our confidence in who we are as a people, confidence in our common identity as Americans, as well as in our democratic institutions and processes. And I did a short op-ed in the Wall Street Journal in that connection today, tying that I hope that we will restore our confidence to Veterans Day and the type of experience that we have in our military, where people come into our military from all sorts of backgrounds with different biases and prejudices, and those melt away based on a good military unit that is bound together by common purpose and mutual respect and reliance on one another. Good military units become families in which the man or woman next to you is willing to give everything, including their own lives for you. And I think we could use a bit of that in our society today. A restoration of strategic empathy to understand the competitive environment of the world, but I think a restoration of empathy for one another as Americans as well. So, Arthur, I think I'll just stop there. I'd love to hear where you'd like to take the conversation, and thanks to everyone for the privilege of being with you.
It's a privilege to have you here. Should the United States maintain a long-term military presence in Afghanistan, Syria, and Iraq to keep radical Islam and terrorists in check?
Absolutely. And you know, this is not a theoretical case, right? This we know that what happened on 9/11 was only made possible because a terrorist organization, Al Qaeda, enjoyed a safe haven and support base provided to them by the Taliban in Afghanistan. We know that the risk of mass murder attacks against us and in Europe went up dramatically, and there were many successful ISIS-inspired and planned and executed attacks when ISIS controlled territory the size of Britain between Syria and in Iraq. This doesn't mean that we need massive numbers of troops. It doesn't mean that we have to spend hundreds of billions of dollars. But what it does mean is that we have to be present to enable others to bear the brunt of the fight. In Afghanistan, for example, the U.S. Military is engaged there. 10 of our courageous soldiers made the ultimate sacrifice to protect us in Afghanistan this year. But every day, about 30 Afghan soldiers and police give their lives to preserve the freedoms that the Afghan people have enjoyed since 2001. And again, you know, it's not a theoretical case. Remember, Al Qaeda declared war on us in the early 1990s. They committed the first Twin Towers bombing attack in 1994 using truck bombs. And then we didn't really pay much attention to them until they blew up at our embassies in Africa in 1998. And then what do? We fired a few cruise missiles into Afghanistan and called it a day. And of course, we know what happened on 9/11 just a few years later. So 2 years later. So I think that it's not a theoretical case. I think it's easy for us to see what the cost is associated with sustaining our efforts. We also have to be able to imagine the risk and what our continued efforts are preventing.
In terms of our democracy, what's your evaluation of President Trump asserting that he won the presidential election, that Biden's purported win was due to widespread but unidentified fraud, and refusing to cooperate in the transition to a Biden presidency? Now, I'm not talking about bringing a legal case if you have a valid legal reason, or asking for a recount if you have a valid recount, but specifically what he's done.
Yeah, so I don't have a problem either with the campaign challenging results through our judicial process. I mean, that's okay, right? I mean, that's what Al Gore did with the very close election with George W. Bush as well. But what I think is damaging to our democracy and polarizes us further and plays into the hands of our enemies are these unfounded allegations of widespread voter fraud. It's just not true. And what is I think regrettable in particular is that actually the Trump administration made our elections much more secure. I was part of that effort in 2017 when we convened across our whole government, an organization called the Cyber Infrastructure Security Organization, ensured in particular that our votes could not be tampered with, established federal standards, worked with the 54 different entities in our country that count votes, and raised that security to a very high standard by 2018. This is why the 2018 elections, you didn't hear anything about this, because we did a really good job securing that election. The other change in policy allowed our cyber forces to be much more active and to combine a good offense with a good defense, and that helped in connection with Russia's in particular, but also now Iran and China's sustained campaigns of disinformation. And this is really cyber-enabled information warfare, right? We're waging a defensive battle against that much more effectively. The problem with it is it's just not true. If the president is complicit and his family members and campaign are complicit in disinformation, right? It's an uphill battle for us, right? It should be the opposite. We should ensure that our leaders don't compromise our principles to score partisan political points. Now, I would say that both parties have been guilty of this, right? I think in 2016, the Steele dossier, for example, the DNC hiring foreign intelligence agents to to gather information about candidate Trump. I think the claims that some made that were also unfounded, that the Russians did throw the election, did succeed in bending the results of the election toward Trump. All of this plays into the hands of our adversaries, just like Trump's statements do about these election results. So we just have to be better, and I think the way we're going to get better is if we all demand better from our politicians.
Says the elephant in the room is President Trump. So, General, what was it like to work with him, and what is your assessment of the man? And there's a parallel question: why did you join the Trump administration, and why did you leave?
Yeah. Well, I joined it. It was an easy decision to join, right? He was the 5th commander-in-chief I served. I was in my 33rd year of active duty service, and I took on the job of National Security Advisor on active duty as kind of a bonus round, the ability to make a contribution to the elected president, the latest of 5 commanders-in-chief. I was never a political person. I went into West Point when I was 17. And I followed, the example of George Marshall. I decided that I would never vote while I was on active duty, and I encourage everybody to vote. Obviously, I voted for the first time in my life in this election, but I never even voted. Right, so I saw it as an opportunity to help regain our strategic competence. I've been on the receiving end of policies and strategies developed based on, I think, fantasy in Washington. And now, as I was dealing with reality on the ground in places like Afghanistan and in Iraq, and it was an opportunity, I think, to administer a corrective to these unwise policy approaches. I think we got good outcomes while I was there. We ran a process that I described in the conclusion of Battlegrounds that I think produced good foreign policy results in that first year. But in the process, I got used up. Right, I got used up because I was oftentimes telling the president what he didn't want to hear. I would not have changed anything. I mean, I wrote a previous book, as Arthur mentioned, Dereliction of Duty, and in that book, I was, I found that in the research, I found that many of President Lyndon Johnson's advisors, they concluded, hey, to keep my influence with the president, what I'm going to do is tell the president only what the president wants to hear. Well, of course, that begs the question of what the heck good is your influence anyway, right? If that's what you're doing. So I was always probably the bearer of what the president didn't want to hear. And then also, I think there were those in the administration who didn't want us to run an effective national security policymaking and decision-making process, one that I designed to give the president multiple options, to give the president best analysis, but give the president multiple options. Those who serve in any administration, I think, are motivated by 3 fundamental motivations. Either, first of all, like I was, I think, and other civil servants are, and military officers and other political appointees, I'm sure, as well, who are there to help serve the elected president, who recognize, hey, you're not the person who got elected, right? You're not there to make policy. You're there to help the president be effective. And to do so by providing multiple options and then assisting with the sensible implementation of the president's decisions. A second group of people, they come into an administration, I think, because they want to advance their own agenda, right? Their own ideas on, immigration or trade policy or you name it, right? And they want to manipulate decisions consistent with their own agenda. They don't want to give the president multiple options. And then there's a third group that maybe defines their role as saving the country and maybe the world from the president, right? This is the anonymous op-ed writer, for example. I think the problem with the second and third group of people is that they're a danger to the Constitution of the United States, right? Hey, nobody elected them, right? Sovereignty lies with the people in our democracy. And so these are people who I think are actually undermining the sovereignty of the American people with their actions. And of course, there are checks on the president. There are checks on the president in the form of an election, obviously, but also in our legislative and judicial branches of government. And that's where the checks ought to be, right? Not with people who you don't know on certain staffs obstructing an agenda. So I mean, that was my observation, and I just got used up, right? And I had frank conversations with the president about it. I said, hey, I don't want to stay here a day beyond when I'm effective. What do you think? When should I go? And we worked it out. my frustrations grew a little bit toward the end, and I said to the president and chief of staff at one point, hey, just give me a date, like right now. I just want a date right now. But then, I talked to the president on the phone the day he decided to hire John Bolton. I said, hey, listen, I'll stay on until he comes in. I'll help the transition, which I did. And I wanted him to succeed, right? But he had a much different style than me, obviously. But it was a privilege to serve. Looking back on it, hey, I was going to be done when I was done. I decided when I took the job that I would retire out of that job. And at one stage, those who didn't like giving the president options, they offered me to compete for 4-star jobs and so forth in the Army and the Joint Force. And I respectfully declined those opportunities and just made it clear my intention was to retire out of the job.
We're all concerned about what's going to happen with the Iran nuclear deal now that we have a new president. Could you address the Iran nuclear deal and what your advice to President Biden would be with respect to Iran?
Yeah, I would say whatever you do, do not get back in the Iran nuclear deal. I think the Iran nuclear deal was a political disaster masquerading as a diplomatic triumph. We just made too many concessions, and it was too weak of an agreement. And so the agreement itself was flawed, in large measure because of the sunset clause. All it did was just delay, the really threshold capability if they adhere to it. The verification aspects of it were really lame, inadequate. Iran immediately, before the ink was dry on the agreement, said, hey, here are the places you can't see, right? It didn't restrict Iran's development of related capabilities like long-range missiles, for example. And so I think it was fundamentally flawed and dangerous for those reasons, but especially because the sanctions relief and the huge payoffs we gave them up front really just gave them money to use to intensify their 4-decade-long proxy war against us, right? And what I write about in Battlegrounds is that we keep repeating this cycle, right, of thinking, hey, a conciliatory approach with Iran, it's going to work this time. And that goes all the way back to the Iranian Revolution when Jimmy Carter sent Zbigniew Brzezinski to Algeria to meet with the foreign minister. Well, yeah, what happened after that? They took 77 Americans hostage. We had a period in which we thought, well, they're desperate now. They're going to want to have a better relationship with us, and this is why, in large measure, that President Reagan didn't do anything to strike back against the Iranians after the bombing of our embassy and the Marine barracks in 1983 in Lebanon. It's also why we had kind of the Iran-Contra fiasco. Because again, this was President Reagan thinking, hey, we'll sell them some arms, they'll release the hostages, and then we'll have a better relationship. George H.W. Bush made a speech in which he said, goodwill begets goodwill, and he hoped for a better relationship with the Iranians. And this is when Iranian sponsored terrorizations go global, right? The bombings in Argentina and in Panama, and the assassinations and bombings in Europe and so forth. And then in '96, the Khobar Towers bombing, we lose 17 airmen, and President Clinton thinks, oh, well, this new president, this is hot to me at the time. He's a librarian, he must be a nicer guy. We won't strike back. And this goes on, into the George W. Bush administration, even in connection with Iranian proxies killing 600 of our soldiers in Iraq, and we didn't do a damn thing, and then following that, you have the Obama administration pursuit of the JCPOA. But what's common across all of these efforts was this assumption: hey, if we're nicer to the Iranians, then the reformers, right, the so-called Republicans, they will get stronger, right, and the revolutionaries, right, the conservatives or the extremists, they'll be marginalized. There was a competition at various points between the Republicans and the revolutionaries, but the revolutionaries won, right? And Zarif, the foreign minister, and Rouhani, the president, they're shop windows for the real power, which is with Khamenei, the supreme leader, with the Guardian Council and the IRGC. And And so I think it would be a huge mistake to get back into the JCPOA. I mean, maybe I would keep the pressure on them, the financial pressure on them, the sanctions on them, and try to force them to make a choice. Hey, do you want to be, a terrorist state, or do you want to be like a real country, right? You make the choice. You can't have it both ways, though, because what JCPOA did is it just gave them a lot more resources to intensify, the sectarian civil war across the region, a civil war that is designed, I think, to keep the Arab world perpetually weak, or to have influence across the region. And this is, of course, what also gives jihadist terrorist organizations the ability to portray themselves as patrons and protectors of beleaguered Sunni communities.
You must have strong views about the president firing the Secretary of Defense, upending senior ranks, literally weeks before he's supposed to transfer power. What is your view about what's going on in installing loyalists in terms of our democracy, in terms of people's perception of our democracy here and around the world?
Well, I'll tell you, Arthur, I can't figure it out. I don't know what he's doing. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think part of it is just his vindictive nature, maybe. I don't know. I think it's not a good thing. Obviously, that's how I feel about it. I think that any period of transition is a period of maybe increased risk associated with malign actors who would want to take advantage of the turbulence or lack of continuity. This should be a period where we try not to inject additional turbulence into the environment and focus on a smooth transition. I would hope that any president would recognize that the office and the responsibility that goes with that office is much bigger than any one person. That doesn't seem to be a realization prevalent among politicians, in general, and Donald Trump in particular.
You're advising President-elect Biden on dealing with China. What are your three main pieces of advice for him?
Okay, the first piece of advice would be, don't fall for it. Don't fall for what the Chinese Communist Party is definitely. I mean, they're celebrating a Biden victory. Absolutely. I mean, I'm telling you, I think they're wrong to celebrate. I don't think that a Biden administration will be as naive as the party thinks that they will. But what they'll do is they'll say, hey, let the pressure off us. Let's go back to cooperation and engagement rather than competition. And in exchange for that, what we'll do is we'll work with you on North Korea. We'll work with you on climate change. And that will all be lies. They promise to help on North Korea, but really, they're using North Korea as a wedge to try to drive us out of Northeast Asia. Xi Jinping gave a speech and he said, we're going to be carbon neutral by 2060. 70 coal-fired plants a year, 70 a year, right? And not only in China, but across Africa and Asia as well, right? So I think that we have to hold to this competitive approach, galvanize others to stand with us. Look at how Australia stood up to the Chinese Communist Party, right? If we go back to cooperation and engagement, we're going to leave countries like Australia on their own. So I think that's the first thing. Don't fall for it. The second is to recognize that this is not a U.S.-China problem. This is a free world China problem. And there has been a good deal of international cooperation ongoing that hasn't been really reported very much. I think the Biden administration should ramp up that international cooperation, but recognize that there are elements of continuity there as well. The third piece of advice would be to recognize that this is a false dilemma, this so-called Thucydides trap, that we face either the choice between accommodating the Chinese Communist Party or a disastrous war. Okay, that's a false choice. We can compete much more effectively. And this is, of course, a competition that cuts across the public sector, but way into the private sector. And I think that we need policies that across the free world, not just a U.S. policy, that help our companies recognize, help our financial institutions recognize that we should not be aiding and abetting the party, right? We are selling them the rope on really good terms, actually, with which they intend to hang us.
What about cooperation with our allies? We've seen strain with the allies. Now, I'm not talking about asking people to pay their fair share of defense or asking for people to pay their other countries to pay their fair share of various expenses that we've been carrying. I'm not talking about that, but we've strained our relationships with our best allies. And now, if you're advising President-elect Biden, how do you advise him as to what he should do specifically, not in general, but specifics?
Well, exactly. That's the point, right? So I think the mood music will be better, right, with our European allies. But hey, to what end, right? Like, what are we trying to achieve together, right? What do we have to work on together? And so I think just laying out an agenda that is aimed at helping us compete more effectively to ensure that our children and grandchildren have the advantages that we've had. And there are important economic competitions emerging associated with data standards, internet and privacy standards that are going to take the free world working together. The U.S. and our NATO and European allies, but also we must include Japan. I would really lay out an agenda for the U.S., EU, and Japan to work together on a routine basis to promote really our free and open democratic system and our free market economic system, and to reduce the danger of China's active promotion of its authoritarian mercantilist model. And we want to bring India into this. I mean, India is a country with great opportunity, but also tremendous challenges. I think that ought to be top on the agenda, is helping India succeed, right? If India doesn't succeed, the world's going to have big problems, right? Just based on scale. And then also, and just so set an agenda. I keep hearing, hey, we're going to have a better relationship with allies. Okay, I think the question is, to what end, right? What is the agenda? And to recognize that that some of our alliances have been stronger than ever under the Trump administration, and we ought to try not to lose the momentum that was gained. I think with Japan, with India, this Quad format that includes Australia as well has been reinvigorated mainly by Chinese Communist Party aggression. Right? I think that's a positive trend. Also, I think that there has been some progress in defense burden sharing, some really, not much progress with Germany. For example, the German relationship needs some mending for sure. I mean, the U.S. ambassador under the Trump administration did immense damage to that relationship. I think that's going to be easy to recover, though, as will be the relationship with France as well. So, I mean, I feel pretty good about where we are with allies now. I know that there's been a lot of about it because of President Trump's, tendency toward gratuitous insults, hurled at our allies. But I think below the surface, there has been a great deal of cooperation on Russia's sustained campaign of disinformation and disruption, and on the threat from the Chinese Communist Party, especially after COVID-19, the wolf warrior diplomacy, bludgeoning Indian soldiers to death on the Himalayan frontier, the repression in Hong Kong, the aggressive actions in the South China Sea, the threats to Taiwan and Japan, the massive cyber attacks against our medical research facilities in the midst of the pandemic. Okay, I could go on about that, obviously, but I think what's going to help us come together is Xi Jinping. We ought to send him a thank you note on how he's helping us strengthen our alliances.
Talk about climate change and the effect of some of the Biden proposals on our economy. He lost a lot of votes because of what he's talking about oil and coal. And we don't want to destroy our economy, but we really want to deal with the climate change issue. I know it's an international issue, so I'd like to know what your perspectives are on all of it.
Yeah. I think President Biden's, what he's said has not been the extreme, right? I think what we have with so many issues, right, is we have this ridiculous polarization, that, hey, how about just talking about what we can agree on first, right? And this is what I try to write about in Battleground in the final chapters. So what we have is what we see typically covered in the media is this interaction between either climate deniers, right, or Green New Dealers, right? Now, both are ridiculous positions that ought to be drowned out by us in the middle, who recognize that what we can agree on, right? Okay, climate change is happening. Yes, we can agree on that. That faith. Yes, we should be able to agree on that. And then add, yes, we can agree on that. And it demands urgent solutions now because there's a lag time in the application of these solutions, and the problem's not getting any better if we don't act against it. Okay. All right. So if we can agree on that, what else can we agree on? We should be able to agree that we can't afford to have any more of these non-solutions. A solution that is only viable in developed economies, in the OECD countries, that's not going to work, because developing economies will continue to poison the world, like China is right now, like India is right now, like is happening across Africa with these burgeoning numbers of coal-fired plants. You know, a coal-fired plant burns a ton of coal every 10 seconds, right? I mean, that's the immediate problem that we have to cope with. Then we should be able to recognize that okay, if it has to work in developing economies, these solutions have to be consistent with free market incentives. You know, the largest reduction in man-made carbon emissions in history was in the United States with the arrival of cheap natural gas, right? That was associated with fracking, but also other methods of extraction and capture, and that's what led to the conversion from coal to natural gas. Hey, that could have international implications because we can export LNG now, right? And there's the development of these terminals in Louisiana, the Mexican coast. I mean, that's a huge win for the United States, but it's a win for the world, right? And we ought to really be pursuing this as a bridge to other sources. And what are the other sources? Whether there are cheaper renewables available now, there are also high capacity, high density battery storage that makes renewables more viable. And then, of course, we have next generation nuclear, which we ought to be putting a lot of money into, right? And these are the so-called pocket reactors that use spent fuel that have that are much less hazardous in terms of the waste that they produce. They have a much shorter life, hazardous life to them, and so we can do it. All of this is within reach and feasible, but people either keep putting out non-solutions, like the Green New Deal, or they're climate deniers, right on the extremes. And so I think there's a lot we can get done here, and we can get done across the free world. I write in the book about how I tried really hard to keep us in the Paris Accord, but now, as I was writing the book, it dawned on me that maybe there's a silver lining to Trump pulling out, because what that accord did is it gave us a false sense of security, right? I mean, it made us feel good about ourselves, right? But it really didn't do a darn thing about climate change.
Address the Middle East, Israel, the Arab countries, and also Turkey's desire to establish itself as a principal power, and of course Iran. So I think if you're going to answer it the way you want, but I'm interested specifically in Israel and the Arabs. I'm interested in Iran, and I'm interested in Turkey, and you handle it any way you want.
Actually, we've come into a time crunch, but General McMaster, I understand that you've agreed to stay on after we close the formal part of this
I'm just
program.
going to check, if you guys don't mind, let me just check my, I think I do have time. I think we did budget it. I just want to make sure.
Sure.
Yep, I can go. I think I'm going until 1:30 with you guys. If that's
Yeah, that'll be great. All right, so let me say thank you, General McMaster, for your program today. Fascinating subjects that you've covered. We've made a contribution on your behalf, on behalf of all our program speakers, to our City Forest. It's a nonprofit here in San Jose whose workers will plant 46 shade trees in East San Jose to combat heat islands, climate change, and improve our neighborhoods with a beauty and provide a habitat for wildlife with these trees. Thank you for that. And next week we have the Bob Keeve Rotary Thanksgiving program with, I think we've got about 12 Rotarians who will be speaking on why they are thankful to be here and now in America as Rotarians. So for now, I'm going to paraphrase my favorite governor by saying hasta la vista, Rotarians. And the General McMaster has agreed to remain online for an additional 15 minutes in case you have any other questions, which Judge Weisbrot will handle. All right, thank you, and back to General McMaster.
Hey, well, thanks. And before some of you depart, I want to say thanks for the opportunity to be with you, and thanks for the great work that Rotary does. I really think civil society groups like yours are more important than ever because you do bring people together for meaningful discussions, civil discussions. You're a force for strengthening our country. I really, really admire what you're doing. I appreciate what you're doing. And if I can make any pitch, I hope you get involved with Hoover here as well. I mean, right at the end of the book, I could not have written this book anywhere else than at Stanford and at Hoover, with great colleagues, great students who helped me with the research. It's a wonderful place to be, and I'm very happy to be part of your community here in the Bay Area. So thanks so much to all of you.
Thank you very much.
I mean, easy question there, right? Like the Middle East, sum it up, right? Sum up the Middle East. You know, when I think about the Middle East, you know, I think that a lot of Americans these days, you know, look at it and they think, okay, the Middle East is mainly just a mess to be avoided. But you know, just when you think it can't get worse there, it does get worse there, right? And so disengagement from the region, I think it would be a mistake. It would be a mistake because problems that originate out of the Middle East don't stay in the Middle East. The Middle East does not adhere to Las Vegas rules, right? And there have always been, you know, reasons for us to have strategic interests there. Of course, after World War II in particular, but even before, it was the Middle East oil supply, right, which was vital to our economy and the global economy. In the context of the Cold War, right, it was an arena of competition in the Cold War. We of course had the Arab-Israeli conflict and the importance of supporting our ally Israel in connection with those conflicts, particularly in 67 and 73. I think what we see now is the grave danger, obviously, of jihadist terrorist organizations that pose a threat to all civilized people. And those terrorist organizations have at their base really the support of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for many years, who engaged in the largest campaign of proselytization maybe in history ever, by exporting this kind of warped interpretation of Islam that was extremist, that was intolerant, and that served as a basis for recruiting, radicalizing young people across the region and beyond. So it's important to engage in the region to separate these jihadist terrorists from sources of ideological support. I think you saw that with, you know, the Trump visit in Riyadh in 2017. People were like, "What the heck is Donald Trump going to Saudi Arabia for his first trip?" If you go back to that speech, King Solomon's speech, we had high hopes, right? Now, many of those hopes were dashed with the way MBS took power, and especially with the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, who was a U.S. resident and a journalist. The Middle East is bound to disappoint, but the Middle East is bound to disappoint more if we disengage. And I think we've seen that dramatically in connection with the Syrian civil war. And how this has created a humanitarian catastrophe of colossal scale. It is, I think of the war mainly as serial episodes of mass homicide that have inflicted tremendous suffering on the Syrian people, have created a refugee crisis that has destabilized countries in the region, but also destabilized Europe, created conditions that will perpetuate violence and terrorism. I thought the terrorist problem in large measure as one of a cycle of ignorance, hatred, violence, right? Using ignorance to foment hatred, and then using that hatred to justify violence against innocent people. And there aren't too many young people getting educated, right, in the midst of these wars now. What feeds into this cycle of violence in the region is Iran and Iran's hegemonic designs, as I mentioned. Iran wants to keep that cycle of violence going, to keep the Arab world perpetually weak, to have applied the Hezbollah model broadly in the region, where there are weak governments in power that are dependent on Iran for support, but Iran grows militias outside of that government's control that can be turned against that government if that government acts against Iranian interests. This is the case in the failing state of Lebanon, which is a real tragedy. It is the case in Iraq, where we have, I think, a solid, Iraqi nationalist president there, but who is hamstrung by Iranian infiltration and subversion of state institutions and functions. And you have this in Syria, and this is what Iran is trying to do in Yemen as well. So So I think breaking that cycle of violence ought to be our approach. The Turks have an important role in the region, and they've not been helpful to us, sure, because of the nature of President Erdogan and the AKP, his party, a party that is an Islamist party that has kind of an anti-Western bent in a way that reverses Kamala and his approach to the West. And he's promoting Islamist parties, Muslim Brotherhood organizations across the region. He's doing it so in partnership with Qatar, these days, and it has a destabilizing effect. Even more so, what he's using now as an arm of his foreign policy are Islamist militias that he's listing into these organizations, training them, and then using the Turkish army as advisors and enablers of these groups. So he's employed them in Idlib province, where he's fighting against kind of the Russian, backed Assad regime and the Iranian-backed Assad regime, and now in Nagorno-Karabakh, and then also in Libya, where he's supporting the government national accord, and then Russia and others, Egyptians, others are supporting this General Haftar's forces. So he has been a force for perpetuating this violence, and he's been increasingly aggressive against the Greeks and in the Eastern Mediterranean in general. So, this is a big geostrategic shift against us. The moves that Turkey has made, and I think what we have to do is play like a longer game. It's not going to get better under Erdogan. The AKP itself, that party is not monolithic or homogeneous. There are factions within that party we could probably work with and maintain good relationships with. And then others in civil society groups and other groups within Turkey. It's immensely important for us to stay connected with them. The reason is that Erdogan has effected state capture, really, over state institutions and functions. Elections still matter. This is why he tries to rig them with the revote in the municipal elections, which actually swung back against him. The institutions of government and the press have been wholly taken over by the AKP, as well as the military has as well. And what they're using is that control to feed the Turkish people a steady diet of anti-Western, anti-American propaganda. So it's a dangerous situation. It cuts against us. Maybe a glimmer of hope is that Erdogan might have some buyer's remorse with the relationship with Putin, because he's engaged against Putin's proxies in 3 different places now. So I think with Turkey, it's a shift against us. So what's happening positive in the Middle East? Well, what's happening positive is there are some calls for reform, right? We saw the protest movements cutting across the region, in Iraq, in Iran, in Lebanon, in places in Syria, even in the midst of a civil war. People are demanding better. They deserve better. They're demanding better. Now, can the corrupt order in Lebanon be reformed? Can Iranian state capture and the corrupt and criminal networks associated with that in Iraq be reversed? That's going to be up to the people in the region, but we may find areas where we can support. We and our like-minded partners can support them. That means staying engaged, right? Not with massive numbers of troops, but staying engaged mainly diplomatically, but also, militarily, with a presence there that serves as a deterrent against those who would attack our friends in the region, Israel in particular. Iran is determined to put a proxy war on the border of Israel, I believe. But really, we have to remain engaged diplomatically in these areas to try to break the cycle of sectarian violence, encourage the reforms it'll be over decades, that help the region emerge from this failure, of governance and failure of serial failure of different political models. So, Middle East is, as my dear friend and in many ways mentor, Fouad Ajami, for whom the chair that I sit in is now named here at Hoover, is a very wise man. He said, it's not a fast part of the world. And so we need a sustainable long-term approach to that part of the world.
Everybody's concerned about North Korea getting the bomb. And that seems to be what their main purpose is. What should the United States policy be, and how can we effectively stop them if we can? What would you do?
Well, I think we have to test the thesis that Kim Jong-un can be convinced that he's safer without the weapons than he is with them. And the way to do that is with this campaign of maximum pressure to put constraints on the regime, such the regime does have to make a choice. And we've never done it. We've never been able to carry that off. And we do have in place unprecedented UN Security Council sanctions. I think what we could do now is we could get the Chinese to implement them. And the way to do that is with secondary sanctions against Chinese financial institutions. If they're facilitating circumvention of those sanctions, we still have options available. We could do the same against Russian entities that keep these North Korean slave laborers employed so they can send remittances back to North Korea. I think there's more we can do, maybe in cyberspace and from an intelligence perspective. We could interdict smuggling operations that circumvent sanctions, on the high seas. I think maybe even under Article 2 authorities under our Constitution, the president could do that. But I would really caution against resurrecting the failed pattern of previous efforts at denuclearization. And I would advise, not that they would want to listen or anything, but a Biden administration, hey, you just don't do it again, right? Don't fall into the trap of what I think is going to happen here is a North Korean provocation, probably coming soon, either shortly before or after the inauguration. After that provocation, maybe a nuclear test or another long-range missile test, then that North Korea will wait for us to clamor to come talk with them, and they'll demand a big payoff just for the privilege of talking with them. We'll give them that payoff. They'll apply it, to their military programs. The North Korean people will not benefit from that payoff. We'll alleviate some sanctions maybe as part of that deal just to talk with them. I think the Obama administration, because they are enthusiastic, to change the mood music with international cooperation, I think that they will try to make these multi-party talks, which will be, again, as the previous ones, kind of unmanageable, unwieldy, especially if they involve the Chinese. They will try to really undermine the overall effort. In our desperation to get a deal, because we look at these deals as ends in themselves, oftentimes this is what was the case with the Iran nuclear deal. This was the case with the 1994 agreed framework with North Korea. Then we'll just make concession after concession, and what we'll get out of it, we'll get a weak agreement that locks in the status quo as the new normal, and then allows North Korea to take big payoffs, in terms of sanctions relief, and then what North Korea will do is then break that agreement with the next provocation and repeat the cycle again. I mean, that's what they do, right? It's like the Geico commercial. If you're North Korea, that's what you do, right? So I think we should not fall for that. We should test the thesis, and I think that part of that is to prepare for military options, right? I mean, how can we know in the future that the next launcher that drives out of a mountain in North Korea is just a test of a missile instead of a real nuclear missile, right? We're not going to be able to know that. So improving our military capabilities, our multinational military capabilities, I think that's also would send a strong message to North Korea. As George Shultz, who is my esteemed colleague now, who's about to have his 100th birthday here at the Hoover Institution, he said negotiation is a euphemism for capitulation unless the shadow of power is cast across the negotiating table. So I'm not arguing for a war in North Korea. What I'm arguing for is the integration of military preparedness, readiness for contingencies with the diplomatic and an economic effort.
We have very few minutes left, and you are really wonderful as a speaker. We appreciate it. But I'm going to give you a hard one. The military has done a much better job with race than the rest of the country. So now race has become a more important issue in the whole country. You're now going to create a policy for the country to deal with systematic racism, the unfairness of the past, and going forward. And you're in charge, and we're looking to you for suggestions.
Well, thanks. I mean, I would, if I had a banner for that plan, it would be equality of opportunity. That would be what we would strive to achieve. And I think what I would do is try to create a narrative that we can all agree on that can restore pride in our nation and confidence that we can continue to get better. I think that what we're lacking these days is a recognition that of the great triumph of our of our revolution because of this radical idea, right? That sovereignty lies neither with king nor parliament, but with the people. But then also a recognition of the failure of equality of opportunity at the outset, and the fact that we didn't remove the greatest blight on our history, which is the institution of slavery, until almost 100 years later. But then we should celebrate, right, that we emancipated 4 million of our fellow Americans in our most destructive war in history. But then recognize the failure of Reconstruction, the rise of Jim Crow and the Ku Klux Klan, and the separate but equal period. But then also acknowledge the triumph of the civil rights movement and the dismantlement of de jure segregation and inequality of opportunity, recognizing that de facto segregation and inequality of opportunity still exists in our country. And this is what I would go after, especially in the area of education. And this would not be the Biden program, I'm telling you. I mean, I think that this, we have to get beyond, coddling teachers' unions. I'm sorry to say it. My mom, was a big skeptic of teachers' unions, and she taught in inner city Philadelphia for 35 years and was an amazing teacher. Her kids did extremely well, and against all odds in a very underserved community. And I think we need real education reform. I think in the short term, that's going to require more school choice. I think of Richard Rothstein's book, The Color of Law. I don't know if anybody's read that.
We read it.
It's a great book, and of course it's interesting because it starts in the Bay Area, right? And it talks about how East Palo Alto happened, right? So I think the lesson ought to be, and what we could do in this plan, is if bad policy created conditions of inequality of opportunity, good policy can return us to can help us achieve real equality of opportunity. I think all of us have a role, in who we hire, who we mentor, who we sponsor, but I think we can do this. We have to restore our confidence, and we have to stop this interaction in the meantime between, I think, identity politics on one end of the spectrum and bigotry and racism on the other, right? And the vast majority of us need to come together, right, and restore our ability to empathize with one another. But education would be, I'm sorry to go on about this, but this is something I've been trying to learn about and think about more. But I would put equality of opportunity and education reform at the very top.
Richard Rothstein spoke to us a few weeks ago, so we're very familiar with his book. You are fabulous, really fabulous. We really appreciate your coming today. I know Fernando needs to close the meeting, but you are invited back anytime you're willing to come. And really, you are an outstanding, outstanding speaker. And we very much appreciate your taking the time to talk to us on Veterans Day. And anytime you want to come back, we want you back.
Thank you so much. On your last question, I'll just point out I did have an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal today on military and what we can learn from the military experience in connection with bringing us together. Thanks to all of you.
Thank you, General McMaster. That was terrific. We're very lucky to have you on our side, I'll tell you that. All right, with that, we want to thank everybody. See you next week. Thanks. The meeting is adjourned. Hasta la vista.
Happy Veterans Day.